All right, awesome. Awesome. So where we're going to pick up is on page 136, as it was popped in the chat, the chapter to employers. And I was kind of talking with some people before the meeting and even well before the meeting about, man, if I get hung up on the title of the chapter, I'm going to miss some just so vital and so important information. Oftentimes I see the chapter to employers and I think it's like, oh yes, I was maybe not a good employee when I was drinking. Now I got sober and now I'm a better employee. Yes, yes. Or I might think, I'm not an employer. This chapter doesn't apply to me. Or I'm not employed. This chapter doesn't apply to me. But I want you to know that we're going to go through and we're going to see just how applicable this chapter is to us where we are today. And we're going to see some vital step one information, and we're going to get a lot of useful information as it pertains to working with others. And man, if you're somebody like myself who struggles with direct, honest communication, To Employers has got some tips and tricks for it. And so one of the things I just kind of want to start off To Employers with talking a little about where To Employers comes from. So the majority of this chapter, there's a little introduction by Bill, but this chapter was written by a gentleman by the name of Hank Parkhurst, Hank P. And if you don't know anything about Hank P, that's okay. Neither did I. Yeah, his story was in the first edition of the book. I believe it was The Unbeliever. Let me see if that's what you put in the chat. Yeah, you did. Yeah. I didn't get there. So he wrote the story Unbelievers. And one of the things is this book would not exist without Hank Parkhurst. If you've ever investigated some of the history of the book Alcoholics Anonymous and how it came to be, man, it was a lot. Yeah, his was a vital contribution to Alcoholics Anonymous. Without him, we wouldn't have written the book. He was a big, okay, we got to get this book written. We got to get it done. And over the years, a lot of sort of Hank's characteristics kind of got thrown onto Bill Wilson. So sometimes you'll hear Bill Wilson described as, oh, Bill, he was the consummate salesman. Bill always selling ideas. Bill was a stock speculator. He was an investigator. Welcome. I'm glad you guys are here. He was an investigator. And the salesman was actually Hank. Welcome. And so Hank is the salesman. And I just want to make sure I read all of the comment in the chat. Yeah, without Hank, the big book very likely would never have been published. And yeah, he was this high pressure sales guy. He was like the promoter of promoters. And yeah, he was, AA number 2 in New York. And in many ways, he might have been considered the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous if he had stayed sober. And see, that's often his contribution to AA kind of gets lost because he didn't stay sober. And some of you might be new or, kind of just coming to this. It's like, hold on, this guy that might have been this whole contributed to the writing of the book, he didn't stay sober? What? What hope is there in that? And welcome, I'm glad you're here. What I want to say is I can't tell you exactly what happened for Hank, but I can tell you a little bit about the history of Hank. Hank was a married man, and Hank fell deeply and madly in love with the secretary who did a lot of the writing. By writing, I don't mean she wrote it. I mean, she typed it out, of the big book. And her name was Ruth Hawk. And he fell deeply and madly in love with her. But there's a warning early on in this book. If my relationship conduct continues to harm others, we are quite sure to drink. We are not theorizing. These are facts out of our experience. Yes. And if you look over at Rob's screen, behind him is Ruth, right? How could you not fall in love with a gal like that? And she was great. And a friend of Big Book Compendium, Fred, he did, we all, in the chat, I need a Ruth. We all need a Ruth, but before we get a Ruth, we have to have a sane, sound sex ideal that we ask God to help us live up to. But Fred ran into Ruth's daughter and had the ability to ask her about, is it true about Hank? And she described it as, Ruth really did love Hank, but he couldn't stay sober. And And so one of the other things that I kind of want to preface to employers with as well is Hank and Ruth, maybe as they were courting or maybe as they were hanging out, they went to this writing class in New York City. And the writing class was, I can't remember who did it. You can read about it in Writing the Big Book. But it was essentially like jazz writing. So if you know anything about jazz, and I know nothing about jazz, so if you know anything about jazz, you already know more than me. But that sort of writing style was a little like jazz, where it's like all over the place. It's here, it's there, it's there. And that's a little like Hank's writing style. It's a little all over the place. It's a little scattered. And from what I've heard, Bill had to go in and try to edit to employers so it flowed a little bit better. And for what it's worth, I always thought it flowed fine, which maybe tells you how my mind goes, a little all over the place. And the last thing I kind of want to just share about Hank and about him being a promoter and him really trying to be a salesman. He wanted to have this chapter in the Big Book that was based off an advertisement style that he had kind of come up with, and it was a question and answer sort of advertisement style. So we would offer a question and then give an answer. So like the question would be like, what would you want to do, or what do you do if you want to drink? And then it would give an answer, and then how do you work the program? And then he'd give an answer, and that sort of thing. And if you've ever read the question and answers Hank came up with, you'll see that he was all over the place. Oh, we have some, just one sec. Dr. Silkworth describes him as a case of pathological mental deterioration. So that's the thing too. He's the first gentleman that we see at the end of the doctor's opinion. He was the case of pathological mental deterioration. He had but partially recovered from a gastric hemorrhage. And then he came to that place of hopelessness. He worked the steps, which is adopted the plan outlined in this book, and he was absolutely hardly recognizable a year later. And that was the demonstration of the power of that spiritual awakening. So love Hank. He's a great guy. Oh, also, if you're at the God as we understand God, and why don't you choose your own conception of God? That came from Hank. There's a gentleman by the name of Jim Burwell, and he kind of took credit for some of that stuff, but it was actually Hank. So that's just some fun facts about Hank. And if you're a giant big book nerd, that might have been helpful. And if you're not a giant big book nerd, I'm really sorry. That was probably not interesting. But I mean, the torrid love affair of Hank and Ruth, I'm hoping to, bring you in on that. Anywho, all right, so 2 employees. So 136 for those that just joined us. So it says, among many employers nowadays, we think of one member, it's Hank, who has spent much of his life in the world of big business. He has hired and fired hundreds of men. He knows the alcoholic as the employer sees him. His present views ought to prove exceptionally useful to businessmen everywhere. But let him tell you. So Hank goes on to say, I was at one time assistant manager of a corporation department employing 6,600 men. And so at this time, Hank he's referencing the work that he did at the company Standard Oil. So he worked for Standard Oil, this huge oil company. One day, my secretary came in saying that Mr. B insisted on speaking with me. I told her to say that I was not interested. I had warned him several times that he had but one more chance. Not long afterward, he called me from Hartford. Hartford's just a city in Connecticut in the northeastern part of the United States. On 2 successive days, so drunk he could hardly speak. I told him he was through finally and forever. And just what I want to say about him being so drunk that he could hardly speak. Mr. B, it's a sign that he very likely had the allergy. That physical allergy, that thing that happens to me that once I start, I cannot stop. And the more that I drink, or the more that I use, the more that I need to drink, and it takes me. And the fact that he had been warned time after time after time, it's probably a sign that he had the mental obsession. Probably when he was threatened by Hank, Mr. B, if you do this again, you are fired. You have one more chance. He gave it to him a couple times. But he probably said, I'm not going to do this again. Like I said, I'm not going to do this again. And it didn't have any effect. And it was my secretary returned to say that it was not Mr. B on the phone. It was Mr. B's brother. And he wished to give me a message. I still expected a plea for clemency. So he was still expecting that Mr. B's brother would be like, no, give him one more chance. But these words came through the receiver. I just wanted to tell you, Paul jumped from a hotel window in Hartford last Saturday. He left a note saying you were the best boss he ever had and that you were not to blame in any way. And that tells us the fatality of this illness. This tells us what an alcoholic or an addict death looks like. Another time I opened a letter which lay on my desk. A newspaper clipping fell out. It was the obituary of one of the best salesmen I had ever known or I ever had after 2 weeks of drinking, perhaps a sign of the allergy. After 2 weeks of drinking, he had placed his toe on the trigger of a loaded shotgun. The barrel was in his mouth. I discharged him for drinking several weeks before. Again, fatal, another suicide. Still another experience. A woman's voice came faintly over long distance from Virginia. She wanted to know if her husband's company insurance was still in force. 4 days before, he had hanged himself in his woodshed. I'd been obliged to discharge him for drinking, though he was brilliant, alert, and one of the best organizers I have ever known. And I mean, that's the thing. If I get stuck on the title, I miss Two Employers has one of the most powerful openings to any chapter in this book, to poignantly point out the waste of life and humanity that happens as a result of this illness. 3 suicides. And he says, here were 3 exceptional men lost to this world because I did not understand alcoholism as I do now. What irony. I became an alcoholic myself. But for the intervention of an understanding person, I might have followed in their footsteps. And what I want to point out is in the middle of this paragraph, we're going to take a bit of a drastic turn that might feel a little incongruous with, the power and the heartbreak that we started this chapter with. He's going to say, my downfall cost the business community unknown thousands of dollars, for it takes real money to train a man for an executive position. This kind of waste goes unabated. Unabated is that, without ceasing, it goes on and on and on. We think the business fabric is shot through with the situation which might be helped by a better understanding all around. And for just like when we spoke about fear, that fear being shot through that fabric. So what being shot through means is if I have fabric going horizontally, fabric being shot through would be the fabric threads going vertically. And what shot through fabric, it would create this sort of like iridescent lighting. So like, and those, you guys remember in the 90s where they'd have those holographic like baseball cards where it's like one way it's one, the other way it's the other. That's what we're talking about. So just intertwined. The business community is intertwined with this alcoholism. And again, that's what I mean. It's like, whoa, why the stark contrast? We're talking about this loss of life and now we're talking about money. What's going on here? And so what Hank is trying to do is Hank is trying to sell, in many ways, non-alcoholics on why alcoholics ought to be saved. And so what he's doing is he's starting with this appeal to emotion and these incredible, wonderful, meaningful lives that were lost because of this illness. And then now he's going to do an appeal to logic. He's not appealing to emotion. He's, man, you might, maybe that doesn't touch your heart, but you don't want to lose money, right? And so we'll see that thread going through Two Employers. And so that continues on. Nearly every modern employer feels a moral responsibility for the well-being of his health. I often make the joke with my sponsees, I'm helping. So much so that a sponsee of mine gave me a hoodie that says, I'm helping. I might be a little codependent. But, and he tries to meet these responsibilities. That he has not always done so for the alcoholic is easily understood. So what he's offering is some understanding. Hey, I want to offer you grace. I know that you've tried. I know that you've worked with people like me, and it hasn't been easy. To him, the alcoholic has often seemed a fool of the first magnitude because of the employee's special ability or of his own strong personal attachment to him. The employer has sometimes kept such a man at work long beyond a reasonable period. Some employers have tried every known remedy. In only a few instances has there been a lack of patience and tolerance. And we who have imposed on the best of employers can scarcely blame them if they have been short with us. So we're offering that I know you tried, I know you've been patient, that understanding. And here, for instance, is a typical example. So one of the things throughout this book is we give information then stories, because stories are what we relate to and can understand. And so we'll also see kind of a glimpse of like Hank's communication skills. Even though he's a high power salesman, he didn't come across as the most effective salesman in this chapter to employers. So we'll see how it goes. So here, for instance, is a typical example. An officer of one of the largest banking institutions in America knows I no longer drink. One day he told me about an executive of the same bank who, from his description, was undoubtedly alcoholic. Hold on one sec, there's something in the chat. Clarence S. from Cleveland, Ohio. Oh gosh, I'm gonna struggle reading. 880. He lived in Cleveland. Okay, I won't be able to read that street address today. And so so what he's saying is that guy was likely Clarence S. Clarence started AA in Cleveland. Now, if I remember correctly, Clarence was had a bit of a difficult personality, and was a little, if I had just kept reading, you would have said that in your note. Bear with me, guys. So Clarence led a revolt to separate from the Oxford group and announced a special meeting of alcoholics starting in Cleveland. His group of dissident anti-conference, anti-GSO members. So he had these strong opinions. And ironically, AA is probably better for his strong, negative, divisive opinions, because Clarence helped break Alcoholics Anonymous off from the Oxford group. And in many ways, the first very true AA meeting, so not, the drunk squad of the Oxford group, would have happened in Cleveland, which I don't know if there's anyone here from Cleveland. Are you guys like, yeah, that's us. Woo, we're number one. Maybe not. Maybe Cleveland is more humble than me. In fact, I'm almost positive Cleveland is more humble than me. So some fun facts about very likely Clarence. All right. So welcome. Glad you're here. We're on page 138. So Clarence, he was undoubtedly alcoholic. This seemed to me like an opportunity to be helpful. And I love that theme of being helpful. I'm not here to fix, to save, to manage, but to be helpful to God and to those around me. That's what I'm called to do. So I spent 2 hours talking about alcoholism. That's something I want to point out. 2 hours. He's not even working with the newcomer. He's working with this potential connection to the newcomer. 2 hours. 2 hours talking about alcoholism, the malady, and describing the symptoms and results as best as I could. 2 hours. Now, again, Hank is the consummate salesman. Hank is the high pressure sales guy. And so at the end of 2 hours, his comment was, very interesting, but I'm sure this man is done drinking. He has just returned from a 3 months leave of absence, has taken a cure, looks fine, and to clinch the matter, the board of directors told him that this was his last chance. After 2 hours. 2 hours of explaining alcoholism. The guy's like, no, he went away for 3 months. He did a little rehab thing, and We said if he drank again, we'd fire him. No, we're good. No, thank you. No, thank you, Hank. We got it. 2 hours. And so it said the only answer I could make was if the man followed the usual pattern. Now I'm going to talk about what that usual pattern is in just a second. He would go on a bigger bust than ever. And so I just, for anyone that's kind of new to the study or new in general, it might be helpful to kind of talk about what that usual pattern is. Now, you don't necessarily have to turn there in the book if you don't want to, but what I want to talk about is the cycle as it's described in the doctor's opinion, and the page would be on page XXVIII, Roman numeral 28. And it's at the very bottom of the page where it says men and women drink. Feel free to cross out men and women and write alcoholics, because that's what we're talking about. XXVIII. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Actually, you know what? I'm like, I should probably go there. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. As an alcoholic, what am I after? I'm after that effect. And what is that effect? Now, if it's drugs or something else that brings you to this study, what are you after? That effect, that relief, that release, that ease, that comfort, that serenity. That's what I'm after. Men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. To them, the sensation is so elusive that while they admit it is injurious, they cannot, after a time, differentiate the true from the false. That is my mental obsession. And that is what will lead us back into that cycle again. That when I'm as sober as I am today, despite all the consequences, I can tell you it's hurting me. I can tell you it's been beating me down. I can tell you that it's ruined my life and it's hurting those around me. I can tell you all of that, but I am unable to see what is true from what is false. And what is true is that when I pick up again, when I take that drink, off I go. I cannot control the amount that I take, and I burn my life to the ground. And what's false is this time will be different. Nobody will ever know. I'll go out for 3 drinks, or a little more reasonable, I'll go out for 3 days, but I'll get it back together on Monday. I hate myself, so I might as well get drunk anyways. I'm going to kill myself anyways. Just one sec. If the writing the big book, it's an amazing book. And that's where I got so much of the history of Hank and all of the stuff in it. Yeah. If you're, it's upside down, Jason, flip it around. I had it on Audible. It's like 37 hours on Audible. But man, some of the history, it's so interesting, and some of it, yeah. So if you're ever interested in like, hey, wanting to read more about Hank, writing the big book is the way to go. So it says, unable to differentiate the true from the false. When I am as sober as I am today, I get a thought, and that thought tells me I can drink, and I believe the lie. And off I go. And it says they're restless, irritable, discontented. And if you ask any one of us, hey, when are you restless, irritable, discontented? We all know it's when we're sober. We all don't need to second guess that. It is when I'm sober, I feel that restless and irritable and discontent. Now, I always want to point out that's Dr. Silkworth. He's a doctor and he's having a look at me. And he was saying the patient appears to be a little restless, irritable, discontent. I don't know about you, but for me, it was that screaming in the depth of my soul, that anxiety where it felt like somebody was stabbing my shoulder blades, that depression so bad I could not get out of bed. That feeling like an emptiness deep inside me, like my skin doesn't fit and I don't belong in this world. I don't belong in that sense that I'm a raw, exposed nerve ending, and for some ungodly reason, the wind is blowing. See, it's when I'm sober that I feel suicidal. It's when I'm sober that I feel that hopelessness, when I'm sober. And it says, unless they can again experience a sense of ease and comfort, and that's what I'm after, that relief, that release, that ease, that comfort, which comes at once by taking a few drinks which they see others taking with impunity. That's those normal jerks. I'm in Calgary, Alberta, and we're coming around to Stampede. And so that's it. If you guys don't know what Stampede is, that's where people drink with cowboy hats on. That's it. I mean, there's other stuff, but I'm just going to summarize the important information for you guys that don't know what Stampede is. Drinking in cowboy hats. Now, there are people that will go to their Stampede barbecues, the pancake breakfast, and they, in their cowboy hats, in their cowboy boots, they will have a beer or two and go back to work. That is what it means to drink with impunity. That is not how I stampede. How I have traditionally stampeded is unwell. We don't know where those boots were. I never wore, I'll be honest with you guys, I never wore cowboy boots in my life, but I did have a penchant for losing stuff like my shoes. You know what I mean? I drink and it takes me and off I go. So they drink and it does nothing to them. And it says, after they have succumbed to desire again, as so many do, I take that first drink, I get that ease and comfort, and the phenomenon of craving develops. And that is that thing that happens inside of me, that once I start to drink, I need more. And the more that I drink, the more that I have to drink. That craving. They pass through the well-known stages of a spree. Spree, it looks like a fun word. Spree wasn't too fun as I was going through it. You know, and a spree is any length of time that I'm drinking. It can be days, it can be months, it can be weeks, it can be a single evening, it can be years. And at some point, that spree becomes arrested. That spree comes to an end. And I make the joke sometimes because I've been arrested. I know no one here can relate to that, but the spree becomes arrested, and I come to with that remorse and regret, emerging remorseful, with a firm resolution not to drink again. And that is the hallmark of what is wrong with me. I say, that is it, I'm never going to drink again. And that has no effect. And it says this is repeated over and over and over, and this is how it is a cycle. And unless this person can experience an entire psychic change, an entire spiritual awakening, psychic in its Greek origin means of mind and soul. So unless I can have a profound change of my mind and of my soul, there is very little hope of my recovery. And so this is the cycle. So what we can see is very likely Clarence and two employers. So this guy, he's sworn off. He said he's not going to do it again. And he's off for 3 months, and he's taken a cure. So he's gone to like a rehab or a detox. There's nothing wrong with that. But if he has what I have, if he has the illness that I have, he's going to be thrust into that spiritual malady, and it is only a matter of time before he gets a thought. And he might get some thoughts for a while and be able to be like, no, I don't want to drink. I don't want to drink. I was told this is my last chance. I don't want to drink, but inevitably, he will get a thought. And and that'll be like, I can drink. And he'll think, you know what, I can do it. And off he goes. And that is the cycle. So if it follows that usual pattern, that is the pattern. Now, going back to page 138, we're on the second full paragraph and second full sentence, because that's the thing, like Hank and I really get Hank, you know, like the all over the place, the bouncing around. Some of you guys who have been coming to the study a while, you know, just all over. I get them, hold on, I gotta make sure sorry, somebody was trying to call and I'm like, not now. That's never happened before, where somebody's doing a video call on Messenger, trying to, I hope you couldn't hear the ringing. Although maybe I kind of hope you did hear the ringing, because otherwise, no, you didn't. Oh, so if that person tries to call again, I'll just ignore it. Because otherwise it just looked like a crazy person just responding to a noise that no one else can hear. Sounds right. Thank you all for being here. I'll keep coming back. I sure hope you guys do too. Oh. So the usual pattern, he would go on a bigger bus than ever, go on a bigger bender than ever. I felt this was inevitable. And that line, I felt this was inevitable, I think that's an important place that I need to get to for myself, and the inevitability of the first drink. See, so often I talk about step one, and I talk about step one is not this concession that I'm never going to do it again. For me, that first step is the deep and profound realization that I will relapse, that I will do it again. No matter how much I need to stay sober, no matter how much I need to not do it, I will relapse. It is inevitable. And when I see that, when I see the hopelessness of my condition, I'm able to accept the hope that's on offer. So I felt that this was inevitable and wondered if the bank was not doing the man an injustice. Why not bring him into contact with some of our alcoholic crowd? He might have a chance. I pointed out that I had had nothing to drink whatever for 3 years. And this in the face of difficulties that would have made 9 out of 10 men drink their heads off. Why not at least afford him an opportunity to hear my story? And that is what is useful, my story, my experience with the cycle, my experience with swearing off, my experience with that allergy, that thing that happens to me that once I start, I need more and I can't control the amount that I take, my experience with the obsession, those times I said I was never going to do it again, and gosh darn it, I got a thought and I believed that lie and off I went. This time will be different. Nobody will ever know. If you went through what I went through, you'd drink too, you'd pick up too, you would use too. That is of use. My story, my experience, and also my experience with the spiritual awakening and with the program of action. I got to have experience with all those 3 things. And in so doing, that allows me to help carry a message of depth and weight that I did not have on my own. And it says, "Oh no," said my friend, "if this chappie's either through with liquor or he is minus a job." Anyone ever have their job threatened? Anyone ever able to stay sober based on that threat? Right? Oh, if he has your willpower and guts, he will make the grade. Again, Hank, this high-powered salesman, willpower and guts, man, he is explaining for 2 hours how willpower does nothing against that first drink. Now, keep in mind, I want to point out, it takes a lot of willpower to work this program. It takes a lot of willpower to do a 4-step. You know that amends that you desperately don't want to do? It takes willpower to make that amends. You know the daily program of action, to pray, to meditate, to do your evening review, to make that 10-step call when you're hurting, or to show up with that, for that sponsee, yes, that sponsee, all of that takes willpower. But when it comes to not taking that first drink, man, willpower, guts, human power is utterly insufficient. I wanted to throw up my hands in discouragement, for I saw that I had failed to help my banker friend understand. He simply could not believe that his brother executive suffered from a serious illness. There was nothing to do but wait. And man, sometimes when we're working with people and maybe they're not interested in what we have to offer, that's okay. I don't need to convince them. That's not my job. I often talk about like building willingness. I can't build willingness in somebody. I can offer suggestions, and I can offer little things like we can pray for willingness and we take small actions and build consistency and momentum. But ultimately, that's alcoholism's job, being beaten into a state of reasonableness. I don't beat anyone. I definitely don't. That would be a lot to amend. So I just let alcoholism do it. So it says, presently the man did slip and was fired. Following his discharge, we contacted him. Without much ado, he accepted the principles and procedure that had helped us. If you're writing in your book, what are the principles and procedure? These 12 steps taken out of this book. That's what he had to do. And it says he is undoubtedly on the road to recovery. To me, this incident illustrates a lack of understanding as to what really ails the alcoholic, and lack of knowledge as to what part employers might profitably take in salvaging their sick employees. So he's trying to, sell them on it, And so this is really what he's going to call us to do in this next paragraph, is to let go of judgment. He's asking really what we were asked in the chapter, we agnostics, to lay aside our prejudice. What is prejudice? Is to have a judgment based on something that I have no experience with. Lay aside my old ideas. So he's going to ask the businessmen, the business people that are reading this chapter to lay aside their prejudices, let go of their judgment. So it says, if you desire to help, it might be well to disregard your own drinking or lack of it, whether you are a hard drinker, a moderate drinker, or a teetotaler. Not a drinker. You drink the tea. You may have some pretty strong opinions, perhaps prejudices. Those who drink moderately may be more annoyed with an alcoholic than a total abstainer would be. Drinking occasionally and understanding your reactions, it is possible for you to become quite sure of many things, which, so far as the alcoholic is concerned, is not always so. And so if you have been joining the study for a while, you would have known that in step 5 in the chapter Into Action, we had some things that were called the Missy Elliot promises. Now they're different than the step 5 promises. They're not the step 5 promises, they're the Missy Elliot promises. And so now what we've got on page 139 are what I like to call the Missy Elliot qualifications. Now, if you don't know what the heck I'm talking about, absolutely nobody else calls it this. This is just a weird page thing. Do you guys remember in the early 2000s, I think it was 2002, man, I might be dating myself a little bit. There was this artist, her name was Missy Elliot. She came out with this song called Reverse It. And in that song, she was like, something, let me flip down, flip it and reverse it, right? And then she said it like flip, 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 in reverse. It sounded more musical, right? And then she said, you got a big, and then it made an elephant noise, let me search it. And so what she was clearly talking about in that song, you've got a big book, let me search it for the clear-cut directions laid out to have a spiritual awakening, obviously. But that idea of let's reverse it. So if I want to qualify myself, let's take this information and reverse it. So we have the Missy Elliot promises, now we got the Missy Elliot qualifications. So this is the reaction that a non-alcoholic is going to have to alcohol. As a moderate drinker, you can take your liquor or leave it alone. Is that my experience? That I can take it or leave it alone? So do I have the physical allergy? Or is my experience, so that's not my experience, I cannot take it or leave it alone. My experience is that I continue to pick it up again and again and again, despite the fact that it's tearing my life to the ground, despite the fact that I'm hurting those around me. I do have the mental obsession. But for somebody who can take it or leave it alone, they've got no mental obsession, no insane thought driving them back to drink. And then second Missy Elliot qualification, flip down, flip it and reverse it. It says, whenever you want to, you control your drinking. Now that is somebody who does not have the allergy. Now it's my experience when I drink that I have control. Now keep in mind, as I'm asking about this Missy Elliot qualification, your brain might be like, hey, wait a minute, Paige. Back in 2002, when this song was released, there was this one time I went out and I drank like a lady, listened to Missy Elliot in the clubs, right? But if when you want to, I want you to know that every time I went out to drink, other times I wanted to get drunk, but I didn't want to ruin my life drunk. My experience was I had no control. I would take that drink and that drink would take me. And really, for me, anything mind altering, I would take that substance and it would take me, and off I went. So I have no control. I have the physical allergy. And so is what I like to refer to the Missy Elliot qualifications. And we can keep it going where it says, of an evening, you can go on a mild bender. Anyone here relate to a mild bender, or were they pretty much roaring benders? Woo! Prodigious benders, you know. It was a bender to end all benders. I ruined the whoopee party for myself and everyone else, you know. So, and get up in the morning and shake your head and go to your business. To you, liquor is no real problem. That's not my experience. That's not my experience either. And it says you cannot see why it should be to anyone else save the spineless and stupid. And so these are people whose reaction to alcohol are very different than ours. These are people who do not experience the allergy, who do not experience the obsession. A couple months ago, my stomach stopped handling coffee, which has been a real bummer. So I've had to switch to tea. And so in the morning, I have an Earl Grey tea. And that's it. That end of story. You know what I mean? That there are people who respond to alcohol the way I respond to Earl Grey tea. Now I'm guessing we don't have some compulsive tea drinkers. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. In the chat or in the call. But here's the thing: if I started my day with just chugging down a whole teapot of tea, and then I needed more, and heck, the more that I drank tea, the more that I needed tea, and it's a diuretic. I'm in and out of the bathroom, but I'm chugging tea, and I'm going on a 3-day Earl Grey bender, and man, I run out of Earl Grey, and chamomile isn't the good stuff, but give me something. You know what I mean? You'd be like, what is wrong with drinking tea? Are you your mutt? Like, what is? It's lovely. It's a lovely calming thing. I'm not criticizing. I made a joke last week about Dr. Phil, and everyone was, I love Dr. Phil. I'm not criticizing Dr. Phil or chamomile, but yeah, you'd be like, what is wrong with you? How could you be so, going from crushing and sniffling chamomile tea leaves, just rolling it up and smoking it, just anything, gotta get my chamomile on. You'd be like, what is wrong with you? Spineless, stupid. How could you be insane, right? But I don't actually respond to tea like that. We don't respond to tea like that. So it seems insane. And then it says, when dealing with an alcoholic, there may be a natural annoyance that a man could be so weak, stupid, and irresponsible, even when you understand the malady better. Malady just means sickness. You may feel this feeling rising. And we can look at like, hey, is that my experience? Have I ever felt that? I'm sure no one here has ever felt that way with a sponsee. And I know we have some people that brought their sponsees, and never, no one here can relate to feeling that irritation with their sponsees or with a newcomer or with anyone in the program. But doesn't that tell us, like, I have this thing, and I have those moments where it's like, just do the thing, there can be that feeling of frustration. So just to get that better understanding for others as well. And there's 2 places in the book where we get these unearned compliments. And this is the second place in the book. The previous is on page 21 when it's talking about the real alcoholic, where we possess special abilities, skills, and aptitudes, but then we tear it down by a senseless series of sprees. This is a similar thing. We get some unearned compliments. A look at the alcoholic in your organization is many times illuminating. Is he not usually brilliant, fast thinking, imaginative, and likable? How did they know? Aren't we just, that's us. Absolutely. When sober, does he not work hard? Heck yeah, we do. And have a knack for getting things done. If he had these qualities and did not drink, would he be worth retaining? Should he have the same consideration? Yeah, in quotes or in the chat. Heck yeah, I do. Rock on. Yeah, you guys are great. I'll just keep encouraging people to come back through compliments. Woo! If he had these qualities and did not drink, would he be worth retaining? Should he have the same consideration as other ailing employees? Is he worth salvaging? If the decision is yes, whether the reason be humanitarian or business or both, then the following suggestions may be helpful. So in working with others, there's almost a sort of flow chart to it. If this, then this. If this, then this. And so if we are willing to give this employee a chance, these are the requirements. And we can make a little note that these are the requirements for the employer. So the employer, to really offer this work, this way of life, needs to be open or considering, am I willing to do this? So if I were the employer, can I disregard the feeling that you're dealing with only habit, with stubbornness or weak will? Can we see that this is an illness? If this presents difficulty, rereading chapters 2 and 3, where the alcoholic sickness is discussed at length, might be worthwhile. rereading There Is a Solution and More About Alcoholism. So if I am stuck in this idea that my issue, or maybe the issue of somebody, yeah, number 2, there's a solution. Number 3, more about alcoholism. Talking about that if I don't have an understanding, or if I'm stuck in the idea that this is stubbornness, weak will, bad habit, immoral, and for myself or anyone else, heck, if I'm brought to this study because there's somebody I love that has this illness, rereading the chapters, There's a Solution, More About Alcoholism, to really pinpoint. And those chapters really lends in, of course, we talk about the allergy, but the mental obsession, because that is what is so confounding for people around us, as it is confounding for us. Man, I said I didn't want to do it again, and I meant it. And I talk about this every single time. I said, I don't want to do it again. I meant it. I didn't want to do it again. And that had no effect. I could tell you, I could rattle off all the consequences from doing it again. And I could tell you all the reasons I needed to stay sober. And I'd go do it again. And that's the power of this thing. To understand, I'm not of weak will, I'm not immoral, I'm not bad. If you're here today and you've relapsed time and time again, it is not that you don't want this thing enough. It is that if I have this illness, I am beyond human power. My desire to stay sober has no effect on my ability to stay sober. That is confusing, right? Sometimes we hear, oh, they must not know. I am beyond human aid, and to offer that understanding to others. So you, as a businessman, want to know all the necessities before considering the results. If you concede, so if we're able to open ourselves to surrender the fact that your employee is ill, not bad, not wrong, not immoral, but up against an illness over which they cannot have any power in and of themselves. Can he be forgiven for what he has done in the past? Can we let go of what has happened? Can his past absurdities be forgotten? Can it be appreciated that he has been the victim of crooked thinking directly caused by the action of alcohol on his brain? Now, in terms of like weird page things, like To Employers is absolutely filled of weird page things. Now what we get into is what I like to call the hypochondriac qualification. So if you're not sure whether you're an alcoholic, we turn to page 44, we qualify ourselves, if when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take. And it's actually before that, it's if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, do I have the obsession? Or if when drinking, you have little control over the amount you take, I have the allergy. Okay, that's it, I'm probably alcoholic. Boom, boom, qualified. This is what I like to call the hypochondriac qualification. So if you're not sure about whether or not you're a hypochondriac, let's take this test with us. So it says, I remember well the shock I received when a prominent doctor in Chicago told me of cases where the pressure of the spinal fluid actually ruptured the brain. No wonder the alcoholic is strangely irrational. Who wouldn't be? With such a fevered brain, normal drinkers who are not so affected, nor that can they understand the aberrations. And in my 1930s dictionary, which is not the cool one, it's the nerdy 1930s one, aberration is mental derangement of the alcoholic. And so here's the hypochondriac qualification. Anyone here read that and then get a headache? If you got a headache, you might have some hypochondria. If you're like, yeah, the rupture and the spinal column in the brain, got a headache, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. And so, and in the chat, what we have is, that's from a book published by Edward Cowles, MD, in 41. The habitual, migraine, reading, doing the best we can. I had the migraine before we read that. I want to point out for anyone that came late, I had the migraine and then I read it and migraine didn't get worse. So I'm okay, guys. So the habitual drunkard craves liquor because of intracranial pressure. He has a pressure many times above that of normal individuals, even when he's not drinking. This change in personality is the result of pressure on the brain. pressure of the fluid in the brain and the higher centers of the cortex. That might not hold up to today's sort of brain scans and studies, but it's just kind of a fun theory that they had. And I mean, how little we knew about this illness. And even today, when we can understand that there's probably more enzymes and can't find another word, enzymes, that's it. Only enzymes are at work. I'm sure there's other things, but I can't find the words for it. That this is still what we have found that works for people like us. So, you know, decades later, we know that, you know, it's not caused by pressure. And yet this is the solution, the only solution that we have. So it says, your man has probably been trying to conceal a number of scrapes, perhaps pretty messy ones. They may be disgusting. And if I come to this study, if I come to sobriety with some stuff that I just am disgusted by, again, I am not alone. You may be at loss to understand how such an seemingly above board chap, like a good person, could be so involved. But these scrapes can generally be charged, no matter how bad, to the abnormal action of alcohol on his mind. And what we're pointing to in this one is the physical allergy in this case, that lack of control. So it says, when drinking or getting over about an alcoholic, sometimes the model of honesty, when normal, will do incredible things. Now, we don't mean getting the Pulitzer Prize or the Nobel Peace Prize. We mean it's incredible that you would absolutely destroy the fabric of your life. That's what we're talking about. Afterwards, his revulsion will be terrible. Again, we kind of see going through that cycle, right? I take that drink, that allergy kicks off and off I go. I do these incredible, terrible things, and I come to filled with remorse and regret. And that has no ability to keep me sober. Nearly always, these antics indicate nothing more than temporary conditions. This is not to say that all alcoholics are honest and upright when not drinking. So if anyone's like, hey, lend me some money, that's not what we're saying. Of course, that isn't so. And such people often may impose on you. Seeing your attempt to understand and help, some men will try to take advantage of your kindness. If you are sure your man does not want to stop, he may as well be discharged. The sooner the better. Do not enable. If they don't want it, and this mirrors kind of the directions we were given in page 96. If somebody's not interested, that's cool. Don't be interested. Go. Oh, if you look behind Rob, you'll see Hank. Hank, handsome fella. How could Ruth not fall in love with a handsome fellow like that? Charming man. Somewhat a seemingly above board chap. It's just, I'll keep coming back. I hope you guys do. All right. So essentially, do not enable. You are not doing him a favor by keeping him on. Do not enable. Firing such an individual may prove a blessing to him. And that's what it was talking about in Two Wives. I believe it was page 116. Yeah, I have a note that says page 116. Yeah, page 116, where it's talking about how if I get fired or if the alcoholic gets fired, that may be a blessing, because that hopelessness may convince me that I need help. If I'm able to keep things afloat, I don't got a problem. I don't steps, no thank you. I don't need that. We're just going to go finish this paragraph and then the next little paragraph, and then we'll wrap up. So I might go a minute or two over. I just want to let you guys know. So it might prove a blessing to him. It may be the jolt he needs. And again, that fire him first, help create that hopelessness, and then offer the hope of this program, the hope of the spiritual awakening. And it says, I know in my own particular case that nothing my company could have done would have stopped me. For so long as I was able to hold my position, I could not possibly realize how serious my situation was. Had they fired me first, and had they then taken steps to see I was presented with the solution contained in this book, I might have returned to them 6 months later, a well man. 6 months later, That's one of the longer time periods that we see in terms of getting well, 6 months. And that's on the long end, right? And again, this is to somebody who's not interested in the solution. If they're open and they want the solution, give it to them. And we're going to see that in the next couple of weeks. Now, I just wanted to end on this because this is a promise. Did you listen to employers? Delightful. Delightful. It says, but there are many men who want to stop, and with them, you can go far. Your understanding treatment of their cases will pay dividends. To pay dividends is continue to receive payment, after the initial investment. So that initial investment in offering them this way of life will continue to pay dividends. And I know my initial investment in this way of life has continued to pay dividends in my life. So thank you guys. And I'll stop the recording and we'll wrap up with the Serenity Prayer.